Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Coming to you today from Italy, but I'm still going to be talking to you about English history. Where we stopped off in the last video was at the end of the Norman Conquest and the death of William the Conqueror. So after the death of William the Conqueror, his son William became King William II, but his reign was very brief and he was killed in the New Forest while on a hunt and buried in Rochester Cathedral. Possible that he might have been arranged to be killed by his brother Henry, who then succeeded him to become King Henry I of England. King Henry I made a really astute political decision early on, which was to marry Matilda, daughter of the King of Scotland, and a princess from the Anglo-Saxon royal family that William the Conqueror, had deposed from England. So in this way, Henry I was bringing together the Norman rulers who were currently ruling England with the old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, and he was really cementing his family's right to rule, and I think it was really smart. So the first book I read this month was Queens of the Conquest by Alison Weir, and this was a book chronicling the extraordinary women who changed the course of English history from 1066 to 1167. And now, if you remember, I didn't love the book I read about the Norman Conquest, so I was hoping that by reading a book about the queens of this time period, I would get to see a little bit what I consider a more interesting side of things. Unfortunately, I did not love this book. It's certainly a feat to be able to tell a story about these women because there's not that much in the historical record about them. So to be able to weave together some sort of story is an accomplishment, but it relied a lot on letters that had been preserved, and they were reproduced at length, and it was boring. Sorry. So the queens who were covered in this book were Matilda, 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 and Matilda. And all of these queens were kind of trusted regents by their partners. Queens weren't really a thing on their own, but they were trusted to co-sign policies with their husbands, to rule in their stead. Obviously at this time, both Normandy and England were part of this kingdom, and so when the king went off to Normandy, the queen would be regent in England and vice versa. The first Matilda was the wife of William the Conqueror, and she's the one we kind of know the least about. So there's her. And then their son Henry married the one I mentioned already, Matilda, daughter of King of Scotland. Henry I had a son and a daughter, William and Matilda. Matilda they married off to the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So it was a really advantageous marriage, and she kind of got shipped off to Germany at a young age and went over there and learned statecraft and became empress in Germany. Their son William was raised to take over the kingdom, but then he died in a really tragic drunk shipwreck off the coast of Normandy. Luckily, I guess, Matilda's husband then died. Her father called her home and kind of planned to marry her off advantageously, and then really he wanted her to inherit his throne. Henry had his eye on expansion in France, so he married her off to Geoffrey of Anjou, which is a neighboring province to Normandy, thinking to expand his realm of influence in France. His barons weren't happy about that, and then that put Maud's succession in real danger. Maud seems like a badass. She seems pretty cool. She styled herself as empress for the rest of her life, put herself first in everything because she was an empress. She stole a religious relic on her way out of Germany that is still in museum today. She seems awesome. But, okay, so she left her husband, then kind of went back, and then they started fighting with her dad because he didn't give them the dowry he promised, like a few castles on the border of Normandy and Anjou. So they started fighting, and that threw her status as the heir into even more doubt because they were fighting, and then unluckily he died. Henry I died while they were fighting. But Reading Abbey was founded by Henry I. It was a really important abbey, very important to him and his family, and it's where he was buried. So there's a sign on the wall that says, King Henry I is buried somewhere around here, probably in a parking lot, what is now a parking lot. So I'll insert some footage here. Fun fact that we learned about Henry I at Reading Abbey and then became obsessed with is the fact that he died after eating lamprey. Lampreys are a form of really disgusting river eel that was apparently a delicacy in medieval times. Disgusting. Disgusting. Apparently he chowed down on some lampreys and they killed him. Look it up. They're gross. So Maud was, I believe, pregnant at the time with her second child by her new husband. So she wasn't able to travel to England to claim her throne. Plus her spot was weak because she had been fighting with her dad. And so she kind of stepped back a little bit and let her cousin Stephen rush to Winchester, claim the throne, and become King of England. And she kind of waited a few years before traveling to England herself and staking her claim. Okay, so that brings us to what's called the Anarchy, which is the period of Stephen's rule because he wasn't a very good king and he was supported by his own kind of badass wife, Matilda. So we have yet another Matilda. And then we've got this period where Maud comes to England and she and Stephen are fighting for, I think, around 10 years over who should be the true king, queen of England. Okay, so the Anarchy is raging. Stephen and Matilda are fighting against the Empress Maud. Meanwhile, Maud's husband, Geoffrey of Anjou, is really making inroads in Normandy. He conquers Normandy. Stephen's lost Normandy. Stephen's just trying to hold on to England. Geoffrey and Maud's son, Henry, named after her father, grows up and becomes a really charismatic young man. Pretty much Stephen is forced to say that when he dies, Henry II will be his heir. So Stephen will remain King of England until he dies, and then his heir will be Henry II. So Maud doesn't get to be queen. She's still styling herself as empress. She doesn't get to be queen, but her son will be king. And that appears to be enough for her. She retires to Normandy and kind of lives out her days there. Now Henry II is king, and Henry II really doesn't count as a Norman king anymore. He is actually the first of the Plantagenet, is that how you say it? I don't know. Plantagenet kings. And the book I read about him is this one, King of the North Wind by Claudia Gold. This was recommended to me by a friend who also loves English history, and I loved it. It was so readable, such a nice change of pace from the last two nonfiction books I read about English history. It really reads like a novel. It's super compelling, and I don't know if that is just the way the story is told, or, I mean, also King Henry II's life is really interesting. Like I said, when he was like 20, he went to the French court and convinced the French queen to divorce her husband and marry him instead. So cool. So he had this huge empire, and he was really ruling it very strongly. He was known to travel really quickly. That's why he was known as King of the North Wind. And then the thing that he was really bad at was being a dad. So he had 4 sons. He never really gave them power. As they grew up, they rebelled against him. And so then, kind of for the second half of Henry's life, he was fighting his sons and also dealing with the ramifications of the murder of Thomas Becket, who obviously is one of the most famous English saints, was murdered in Canterbury Cathedral by Knights of the King who believed they were acting on his orders, and he was just kind of murdered in cold blood right there in the middle of Canterbury Cathedral. So I wanted to visit Canterbury, but churches were closed during lockdown, obviously, and I didn't want to go if I couldn't go inside. So where we went instead, just to see some examples of exquisite Norman architecture, was Rochester, which is a town east of London, where they have a Norman castle and a Norman cathedral, and I will insert some footage here. And one interesting thing about Rochester Cathedral is that the statue on the right-hand side of that western door might be Matilda of Scotland, so Henry I's wife. That might be a representation of her there on that cathedral door. Yeah, so that is a review of the Norman kings and queens of England and has brought us into the Plantagenet dynasty. So next we're going to be reading about the Magna Carta and that period of Bad King John. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll be bringing you another one soon. The wait won't be nearly as long next time because I've decided to read fiction this month. I've had enough of the nonfiction, taking a little break. So hopefully be back soon. Thanks all, bye!